Welcome to This Is Money podcast. I'm Georgie Frost, and joining me and Lee Boyce today is Helen Crane and Tanya Jefferies. And coming up, how much do I need to save for retirement? To be well off, try £600,000. Unsurprisingly, many of us think that is unachievable. Is it? Tanya offers some pearls of wisdom on how to invest your pension. Plus, chaos in the state pension top-up system continues. Also today, NS&I gets generous. The Bank of Mum and Dad is very much open for business this year. We look at why more landlords are selling up. And are you a victim of dogflation? Don't forget you can stay up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app.
Don't forget, you can stay on top of what's going on in the markets by tuning in to the Digest and Invest podcast by eToro. Go to your regular podcast platform and listen on the go. Digest and Invest by eToro, the podcast for those interested in trading and investing.
But first, inflation has been ravaging our finances of late, but it's also threatening our future. According to new research, if you want to be comfortable in retirement, you're looking at needing to build a pot of nearly £600,000. The rising cost of living requires an extra $4,200 a year to maintain the same lifestyle as spring last year, which means you have to save another £69,000 in all. Tanya, firstly, what do we mean by comfortable? Where has this research come from?
Well, there's a very useful industry standard, which it's published once a year by the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association. And it looks at what income you need for a basic, a moderate and a comfortable lifestyle. So comfortable is obviously at the higher end. They do the research every year, but obviously inflation has had a big impact on it. So Interactive Investor has looked at the research, calculated what inflation has done to their original figures, and then worked out how much more you'd need to save to get that extra income. So that's the basis of all this. In terms of what you need for a comfortable income, obviously it's down to the individual. In broad terms, I think it's about financial freedom. It's about not worrying when you go to the shops what you put in your basket. It's about being able to plan, a holiday every year without really having to check your bank account and budget it to the last minute, just saying, where are we going to go this year? They also make mention of some luxuries attached to this lifestyle as well, which I suppose means that if you're going out with your friends and you think, should we have a cocktail? You don't think twice about saying, oh, yes, let's have a cocktail. That kind of financial freedom, I think it's a state of mind as well as your bank balance. Once you've achieved a certain bank balance, then you can just go off and do that. It sounds very nice, doesn't it?
It does indeed. I do like this PLSA research because they explain, they visualize it, they tell you what it can buy. Obviously, everybody's got different tastes, I just think for people thinking about the future, because it's so difficult, notoriously difficult, you've got so many things that you need to pay for now, that actually when you visualize, do I want to be, well, there's nothing wrong with going to Lidl. That's a minimum lifestyle. But if you want to go to M&S, that's a comfortable lifestyle. Tanya, those £600,000, how realistic is that for many people?
Well, it is realistic for some people because obviously with compound growth, the more you put in and the sooner you start saving, the more likely you are to hit that. But the reality is that under auto-enrolment, what you put by is about 8% of salary. That's split between you, your employer, and the government tax relief. And that's not on your whole salary. That's just on a certain band of it, which is, I think, between about 6,000 and 50,000 roughly. So there's only a certain amount of it going in. Now, a lot of people who are auto-enrolled feel that, okay, if they go along with that, not job done exactly, but they would probably regard as getting them to a comfortable place. Whereas in fact, it's probably only going to get them to the basic or at best moderate place. And if you really want moderate, then I think you need to be looking into things a bit more carefully, how you invest, and also any little thing that can make it better in terms of looking to match contributions, say with your employer. That's a really important one, because if you put in an extra 1%, say when you get a pay rise, so before you've had the chance to enjoy it, you say, okay, I'm going to start doing my match contributions. Your employer will put in more free money, and that is then invested. And compound growth means returns on returns. People think compound growth, sounds really complicated, but it's not. You're just earning returns on your returns. And that actually leads to immense growth, especially towards the end. But the sooner you start it, the bigger the effect, basically. So I think it's a matter of bearing all this in mind. And these figures that the companies come up with, Interactive Investor and so on, they're a decent guide as to what kind of pot you need to save to generate the kind of income you're aiming for. But it's a moving target. I mean, they've used the same formula as the PLSA did, which is fair enough. But that's based on annuity rates back in April last year. And they've changed a lot. They are better now. And also a lot of people go into investment drawdown. And if you invest successfully and also you manage your money in terms of you don't always take the same amount every year, for instance, you adjust it depending on how the market is doing, and to make sure that you do it in a tax efficient way, you can get more out of your pension that way. So there are various things you can do to, say, get you from the basic to the moderate level. And if you're in the moderate level, what you can do to get close to the comfortable level, which is probably what we all aspire to, because I'll go back to the financial freedom term I used in the beginning. That's what you want to go for, really. They call it a lifestyle for a reason. That's what you're looking for, rather than the hard figures.
We'll get on to where to invest or how to invest your pension and live off it in retirement shortly. But Lee, I just want to ask you, some separate research showing that more than half of people saving into pensions believe they will never put away enough to stop working when they're older. That is depressing. Whether that's true and that comes to pass, that's a worry, isn't it?
I think there's just different stages in people's lives, people's working lives, in which, something like £600,000, while it's a useful benchmark to think about, that's how you would have a comfortable retirement. I think a lot of people would hear that figure, especially in their 20s and 30s, and go, how much? I'm never going to be able to save that much. That sounds absolutely bonkers. And I think that this research, the separate research, Living Pension Campaign, is basically, it was a poll that suggests that half of people just don't feel like they're putting enough away into their pension. And I'll be honest, like there are various points in my earlier career where I feel like I wasn't putting enough into my pension. And we're going to go on and talk about the Bank of Mum and Dad shortly. Mm. But I mean, there's pressures on, if you want to buy a home, for example, for people in their 20s and early 30s, especially, a lot of their thought process is getting onto the property ladder, and pension is almost a bit of an afterthought. It's kind of like, oh, that's retirement, that's a long time away, I want to get on the property ladder. And as a result, you might delay or not put as much in your pension as what is required, or might get you to the point where you're going to have a moderate or comfortable retirement lifestyle. But it's a hard thing to sort of predict, isn't it, how your life's going to unfold, what jobs you're going to have, what kind of salaries you're going to earn, that kind of thing. But just in this research, 8% of pension savers who own their homes stopped or cut pension contributions in the 6 months of February 2023. So almost 1 in 10 have had to kind of tinker with their pension if they're a homeowner. So I'm talking about getting onto the property ladder. If you are on the property ladder, and you're facing up to higher remortgage costs, or just a higher cost of living in general, people are cutting back. It's not a huge percentage, but 8% is still enough. And another cohort of people that I kind of guess a little bit worried about is the self-employed. Trying to convince. I've got a number of self-employed friends, and 2 spring to mind, who I have tried for many years to get to open a SIP. A self-invested personal pension, and it's almost impossible. I don't know how we make SIP sexy, but my friends they're not listening. They can't get their heads around it. I think it's just one of those sort of terms where the shutters come down and they hear SIP and they're like, what's that? But I don't know what their retirement plans are. And there's only so much you can say as a man in your 30s down the pub trying to convince your friends to open SIP, they're self-employed, before they kind of tell you to shut up. But pensions are one of those massive beasts to get your head around, aren't they? And you feel like the can is quite a long way down the road, and then all of a sudden you're not that far off it. And you I think a lot of people do fall into this trap of trying to then scramble and make up for the gaps or the lack of money that's gone into it.
I know what you mean about persuading your mates, Lee. I had the same issue. So what I did was what any self-respecting journalist would do, and write about them as a case study. That got them in gear.
Now they have to do it if they're a case study.
Yeah, exactly. Because I got a financial advisor to go through it all with them for that. You literally I cannot do anymore. Tanya, You've written a guide, How to Invest Your Pension and Live Off It in Retirement, a 12-step starter's guide and the pitfalls to avoid. Obviously, it's a comprehensive article. I do recommend going on and reading it thoroughly. But what are the things that really stick out? Some of the perhaps things that we don't think about, and certainly the pitfalls to avoid.
After the pension freedom reforms, I wrote this guide originally then, where it's been updated many times. And it was because at that point, most people were buying an annuity to fund their retirement. But a lot of people, quite understandably, wanted to invest instead. Buying an annuity was really expensive and restrictive. And I think that, but people were new to investing. When you invest your pension throughout your career, you can really just let it alone, let the scheme do the work for you. But when you invest and draw down an income from a pension in retirement, you really have to be on top of it. You have to do an awful lot more work. So the guide was really a kind of a look at, from top to bottom, of all the things you need to consider if you're going to go into this. And I think that the approach then, and I think still now, is that if you're at the point of retirement and you're thinking, do I buy an annuity? I can just live off that. It's guaranteed for the rest of my life, but it's going to cost me more. Or do I look at investment drawdown? And is this for me? This guide will give you an idea about what you're in for. And there's no doubt about it. You do have to do your homework, and it is quite a lot of work. There's all sorts of things to think about. It's not just picking the right investments and staying on top of them. You really have to know quite a lot about tax as well. And looming over the whole thing is longevity, which is the great unanswerable question when you're planning your retirement and how much you need and how not to run out. At least with an annuity, you know, you're going, and your state pension, obviously, that's the reliable bit of your income that is going to carry on. But if you're investing, the market is going to go up and down, the tax system is going to change on you. You're also, and which is a very important consideration, which I thought was very important to put in the guide, is you might be on top of your investments at 66. Are you going to be at 86? At what point do you think, okay, now it's time to buy an annuity? And you do need to set up power of attorney as well. That's the kind of thing that if you're going to go into income drawdown, that is the kind of thing that you need to think about. So the guide just goes through every aspect of it that we could possibly think of to consider. And at the end of the 12 steps, then have a think about, is this you? Are you going to be looking at an investment portfolio and checking up on it? And for how long is very important as well.
Some good advice there, as always, Tanya. One thing that isn't perhaps going to help your retirement funds is forking out to help your kids or grandkids get on the property ladder. But that's exactly what's happening at the moment, and in huge numbers. Family financial aid is expected to support almost half of all homes purchased by buyers under the age of 55 this year, totaling £8.1 billion. Helen, thank you for being so patient. As I said there, it's family, so it's not just the bank of mum and dad. What's going on here?
The idea of the bank and mum and dad is nothing new. You know, we've known for years that parents have been increasingly helping their kids to get on the property ladder, because that is becoming more and more difficult. I think what's interesting in this research, though, which is by Legal & General, is it just shows the extent of how much families are helping out their kids when it comes to getting on the property ladder. So yeah, as you said, 47% of all homes purchased by buyers under the age of 55 are being supported by families. And just the fact that that's under the age of 55 as well shows that, you know, first time buyers are not always people in their 20s and 30s anymore. Their age is getting older and older, and people are still needing support from their families. So
Helen, just give me some context. What's 47% compared to previous years? Is this a record figure?
Yeah, so to put that in the actual numbers, families are going to help with 318,000 property purchases, and that's the highest number since L&G began tracking this in 2016. So it is kind of going up year on year. If you look at first-time buyers specifically, they say that the figure I just said, that over 55, that's all buyers. If you look at first-time buyers specifically, 32% are going to get family support this year, and that's compared to 30% last year. So it is kind of creeping up and up and up and up. And I think what's interesting as well is it's not just mum and dad helping out these buyers now. So 72% of the people that helped people get on the ladder were parents, but 11% were siblings. So this is brothers and sisters lending money to help buy a home. Very, very kind of them. I don't know how I'd kind of react if my brother came to me saying, "Oh, can I have some cash for a house?" Like, nah, probably not, mate. 8% grandparents, 4% aunts and uncles. So it just shows, it's really difficult to get on the property ladder, and people are having to kind of get help from wherever they can, I think.
Lee, I mean, we had some news today. House prices fall 5.3% in a year, the biggest fall since 2009, according to Nationwide. Is there hope on the horizon for people struggling to get on the property ladder, maybe?
I think, as we were discussing on the podcast last week, there's a lot of regional differences at the moment, and what's going on in local markets is kind of variable depending on, the property type. I think there's a big trend at the moment that potentially smaller homes are probably more in demand than like big sprawling pads, for example. And I think that, to be honest, we've had years of quite high house price growth. So I don't really think that that's going to have a huge difference. I'm sure that there's lots of people that are saving up for a deposit at the moment that are hoping to see that figure slip some more. But with the bank of mum and dad stuff, I think there's two things that I think sort of crop up with this. So first of all, people might think, oh, it's just wealth getting passed on. And that's the only way you can get onto a property ladder now. I mean, the bank of mum and dad has become one of the biggest lenders to buy a home, in comparison to banks. We've seen that data before. But on the other side of that is, I think there's a lot of parents that have wised up and do think quite diligently about their children and plan ahead and save. I mean, I'm one of those in that camp. I've said in this podcast for many years, my daughter who's set to start primary school in a couple of weeks' time, I've got a pot of cash that I've been saving that I opened up for her when she was a month old, that potentially might go on helping her get a house deposit. Tuck away a little bit of money each month. It's plenty, 2 decades worth of growth to go in there. And will I be someone who one day will be in the bank of mum and dad category, lending to my daughter? Yes. And I also think that, talking to friends and people that have bought properties in the last 10 years or so, some people borrow money off their parents or grandparents and then pay it back, almost like an unofficial loan system. So you borrow 10 grand. I haven't got £10,000 right now, but if I pay you back £200 a month over the next however many months, it's almost like an unofficial lender. So I think there's quite a lot of that kind of thing that's going on, and maybe don't get completely reflected and really under the skin of these kind of figures. But one thing's for certain, Georgie, and I find this quite interesting in the L&G research. So in 2016, 304,000 homes were purchased with help of family, to the total of 5.34 billion, and in total 77 billion pounds worth of properties were bought with the help of family members. For 2023, they're going to say that it's 318,000, so not a huge amount more homes in general, but 8.1 billion gifted. Yeah. So that's an extra almost 3 billion pounds, and the total value of properties purchased with family funds, 124.6 billion. So I mean, that's not far off doubling compared to where we were at in 2016. That's quite stark, and that probably shows you why there's been such a lean on the bank of mum and dad, bank of sibling, bank of grandparents, bank of auntie and uncle. And I don't really see that changing, if I'm being honest. The hurdle for buying a property and getting a deposit, I mean, typically you're probably talking £30,000. But, when we were buying a home in 2016, our first home, our deposit was £30,000. So it just depends, again, regionally where you're buying, what's going on in terms of local house prices and all that kind of stuff. But I think Bank of Mum and Dad is here to stay. Wouldn't be surprised if they help with half of purchases forever, if I'm being quite honest with you.
Helen, if you don't have the bank of family, bank of mum and dad, I mean, is it? Are you doomed? What help is there? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say you're doomed. Like Lee said, it's just about, so it's really difficult to save up for a house deposit. Even if you do have the support of your mum and dad, it's a lot of money, it's a huge percentage of average incomes. There's no kind of getting away from that. But, it might just mean moderating your expectations a bit. Like we said, you look at different areas around the country, or you look at different types of properties. For example, in the nationwide house price index today, they kind of pointed out that flats have gone up in price much less than houses. So perhaps kind of, sort of moderating your expectations a bit in terms of what your first property can be, and then looking to sort of move up the ladder, being a bit kind of realistic about expectations. It doesn't sound particularly fun or sexy kind of advice, but, just be a bit sensible, work out what you can afford realistically, and start small, I guess, is the advice of people who don't have a huge amount of help.
Helen, can I just ask you about landlords? This is sort of a story that's been bubbling for some time. Buy-to-let landlords selling up at a worrying rate. So between 2016 and the end of this year, almost 300,000 more homes will have been sold by private landlords than have been purchased. That's according to the estate agents Hamptons. I want to know, why? You've looked at 4 major reasons, but also what wider impact this will have. Obviously you'll think people will pay higher rents that can be expected, but this will have a much wider repercussion, won't it, on the whole property market? What are you expecting? But firstly, what are the reasons they're selling up?
Yeah, so our property reporter, Ed Magnus, has had a look at this, and he's identified basically 4 main reasons why buy-to-let landlords are selling their properties. So to look at the stats, Hamptons has said that between 2016 and the end of this year, almost 300,000 more homes will have been sold by private landlords than have been purchased. So there's this gap showing up between how many properties landlords are getting rid of and how many new ones being purchased. Although, you do need to point out that some of those ones that are being sold might be being sold to first-time buyers. So there's a property market sort of regeneration angle to it all. But, the number of buy-to-let properties are going down. The reasons that we've looked at, big one you might think of at the minute is higher mortgage rates. So obviously not all landlords own with a mortgage. Actually, many don't own with a mortgage. But for those that do, especially those on interest-only mortgages, which a lot of landlords with mortgages are, they might have seen their rate go up quite a lot. And if that makes it more difficult for them to make a profit, then they might well look to sell that property. Hamptons actually said that the kind of effect of higher mortgage rates hasn't had a massive impact so far on landlords, but that's something that will probably continue as we go on. I think really the bigger impact, and this isn't anything new, this is something that's been kind of snowballing for years, is the effect of more regulation for landlords, higher taxes, all this talk about making properties energy efficient, and potential rules coming in which are going to make renting out property kind of stricter in terms of evicting tenants and things like that. So this has been going on since 2016. George Osborne brought in some strict kind of tax rules about the relief of landlords getting their mortgage interest and things like that. And yeah, it's a tougher time to be a landlord than it was in the past. We obviously don't, it's difficult to kind of feel sorry for too many landlords for obvious reasons, but it's become more and more difficult and less profitable, basically, for the last coming up for a decade. And I think a lot of landlords are basically kind of thinking, let's cut my losses and give up, especially landlords who are getting older and might be retiring. They're thinking, well, I can sell that property and, as Tanya was talking about, maybe have a more kind of comfortable retirement. So a lot of factors going into it, but they're the kind of big reasons why landlords are deciding to cut and run.
Great. So in theory, we'll have loads of kind of the same houses that first-time buyers would want to buy. The market will be flooded, house prices will fall, and everybody's a winner, right, Lee?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to work like that, Georgie. If
No?
if I'm being quite honest, no, I'm not sure. That's definitely something that's going on, though. This whole supply and demand issue between tenants and landlords. The tenant market has just absolutely blown up in the last couple of months. And I think we were talking about this in the podcast last week. The battle to get a good, decent rental home is difficult at the moment. There's always this sort of seasonal shift. Especially with students and that kind of thing. But it has become very hard and very much a scramble to find the best properties. But these 4 reasons that landlords are feeling a bit squeezed at the moment. Now, as Helen just said, mortgage rates might be a fairly obvious one, but a lot of landlords won't be mortgaged. But those who are facing much higher remortgage costs, and typically buy-to-let rates tend to be a bit higher anyway. The mortgage tax relief stuff, we've known about that for a very long time. That started to get phased in from 2016. The one that's really, I think, kind of leaving big question marks at the moment for landlords is all this EPC stuff, because trying to get your property up a couple of band grades is quite difficult, especially depending on what kind of property stock that you've got. And that is definitely some murmurs and grumbles that I've heard from landlords in recent times. And the trouble is, the goalposts are likely to be shifted, but we don't know if they're going to be shifted. So there's talk about this happening in 2025. That's now apparently going to be happening in 2028, but we haven't been given an absolute, complete yes, that's happening. And a lot of people are thinking, I'm going to have to spend tens of thousands of pounds potentially to bring this home up to an EPC rating that the government has set. And for a lot of homes, I don't think that's achievable. In others,
about 2 million, I think, that will never be able to get it.
And that's it. And also, if you do need to do these kind of works, there's quite likely to be disruption to your tenancy. So you might have to turf a tenant out to have this work done to bring it up to a certain, I'm talking about things like underfloor stuff, insulation, that kind of thing. That are quite big projects, quite pricey projects. And I think a lot of landlords are going, that's the final now. That's the final straw. I've just had enough. Yeah, I'd rather just sell up and, not do this anymore. And I think that's quite a lot of what's driving this at the moment. Until we get some real firm goalposts and what this means, I think it's going to, because 2025, Georgie, we are now within 2 years. I mean, that's the thing. That's what's playing on a lot of minds. Landlords don't want to be fined for having not the right EPC rating. And I think most landlords are receptive to improving energy efficiency, but when it's hoisted in mass effect like this, usually there's big blowback on that. It's not as straightforward as what you think it's going to be. Let's make every home C EPC rated by 2025. Go. If you don't do it, you're going to be...
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, hold on. Okay, how am I going to do this? And I think landlords are fed up.
That's it for part one.
I'm joined now by Sam North from eToro for our latest look at what's been going on in the markets. Sam, how's the last week been?
Well, at one point, August was looking like it was going to be a pretty bad month, but we recovered a little bit into the back end of it. So therefore, this week has been a pretty good one. We saw signs of easing US growth and less inflationary pressure, which helped send the S&P 500 off those lows that we saw this month. This week, we also saw a lot of headlines out of China. After the continuation they've had of their pretty weak data, we've seen a bid to boost the market, which looks to sort of reduce tax on stock trading by up to 50%, look to cut interest rates on mortgages and deposits too. You don't really do this when things are going well, but maybe this can help change the fortunes of Chinese investment options. One to watch there. The latest US jobs report, which came out just earlier today on Friday, was exactly what the Fed would want to see. Another monthly figure below 200k, cooler wages, and an uptick in unemployment. All in all, a good end for the week for markets.
Excellent. And looking ahead for next week, what's on your radar?
So first full week of September, but it is worth noting that on Monday it's a bank holiday in the States for Labor Day, so expect a quiet one there. But once we get through that, things start to come alive a little bit more. China's PMI and trade data next week. We've also got monetary policy decisions from the RBA and the Bank of Canada, and the start of the G20 meeting at the back end of the week. And for any rugby fans, you've got the Rugby World Cup, which kicks off next Friday. We've said it before, September, historically one of the worst, or is the worst month of the year for the stock market, but October, November and December are pretty good. So I think any weakness throughout September will be bought by investors unless things change drastically on the macro front. But at the moment, everything seems okay.
Excellent. That's Sam North from eToro.
Thanks, Lee.
Welcome back. People who spent big sums on state pension top-ups are pretty angry that their cash has apparently gone missing and they can't get answers out of HMRC or the Department for Work and Pensions. Opposition politicians have called the top-up system utterly shambolic and condemned government failures to accurately record state pension entitlement as an insulting failure of basic competence. What a phrase, Tanya. The chaos goes on. Remind us about this one.
Well, the state pension top-up system has always been confusing and unwieldy and difficult, basically because it's run between HMRC and the DWP, and they both run different bits of it, and so a lot can go wrong, really. But it's really been rolling chaos for the whole of this year. Let's start off by saying it is a good deal, and that is why there has been such a big rush to buy it. The state pension, if you qualify for the full rate, is $10,600 a year, and most people are aware that there was a big chunky increase this year, and there will be next year. So it's definitely something to aspire to, and it's guaranteed money as well for the rest of your life. So it's very important. Now, if you have got a patchy or a record, or you just need to top up a few years, it is a really good deal to do this, because as long as you live for about 3 years, you're going to get your money back. It's £824 for a full year. But if you're just putting in a part year because you pay contributions for some weeks and not other weeks, then it's going to be less than that. So it definitely is worth looking at your record and deciding if it is worth your while. It is complicated, though, because there's no hard and fast rules for individuals. It really depends on your record, and also whether your employer contracted you out. And some people didn't know that their employer was contracting them out of the second state pension, which can be incredibly confusing for people. And there are some years that you can buy which won't actually boost your state pension, so you need to know which ones they are as well. Which is why everyone says that you need to go to the DWP to get advice on which years to buy before you hand over your money. Otherwise, you're going to be in refund hell. Which all brings us to the chaos of this year. There was a huge rush at the beginning of the year because a special concession was about to run out. You can buy, at the moment, state pension top-ups right back to 2006. And previously it was 6 years. So this deal was going to be running out in April. And then they extended the deadline to July because the phone lines were jammed and everything was in such a mess. Then they postponed it again. They've now put it back to 2025 and kept frozen the rate. So that makes the deal even better because everything's going up, but the price of buying these very valuable top-ups are going to be frozen for the next 2 years. So even with the deadlines being extended, well, two problems have emerged. The desire to buy top-up seems to have continued unabated. People are still recognising this is a really great deal and they want to do it. But also all the people who bought the top-ups are now waiting for it to make a difference. It's not so bad, I think, for the people who haven't yet retired, because they're obviously anxious to get their forecast updated and for them to see evidence that their often large sums are actually going to make a difference. But for the people who are already retired and maybe on quite a small pension and suffering from the cost of living prices, they've scraped together. One guy told me he's, literally scraped together. He even borrowed money from relatives to add as many years as possible. And then to, wait for 8 months or something for it actually to kick in. You do get arrears, but interest rates have gone up. And a lot of people are pointing out that that's money in the government's pocket, not in their pocket, the longer they have to wait for it. And even if they get arrears in the end, they're just not very satisfied with this situation at all. And some are actually completely furious about it. The issue is that it may well be that you paid in January, February, you heard nothing, you get no receipt or anything. You've got your evidence that you paid, but that's all you've got. There's no receipt or acknowledgement. And you don't know whether you're just sitting in a queue or whether they've lost the money, whether they've temporarily lost the money or completely lost the money. And we've interviewed people, they're in this latest story, they've paid nearly £5,000. I did interview somebody who paid £7,500. Now, he's not in the story. He decided not to go ahead with it. But when you're thinking about that kind of sum disappearing, it is incredibly worrying. And when you ring up the DWP or HMRC, you're not really getting any answers out of these call handlers. People have been saying this for years and years to me. People are polite, but they don't know anything. All they can do is refer it on, and they can't give you any answers. They can't say, oh, yes, I can see your money necessarily. I mean, maybe some of them can, but often people are just told, oh, they're just fobbed off with, oh, it's going to be actioned in 6 to 8 weeks. One woman kept being told it will be actioned in 6 to 8 weeks, but nothing happened. 8 months on, and she was still waiting. So you can understand the frustration that people feel. And this situation has been going on for quite a long time now. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. And the more people buy top-ups, the more people seem to be stuck in a backlog now at the other side of it, having struggled to buy them in the first place. They're now waiting for months on end for it to actually make a difference to their pension.
What of HMRC, DWP? What are they telling you?
They say that the vast majority of payments are processed within a few days. They've dropped the "it's an isolated case" stance they took when we carried one case about a month ago, because we had such a rush of people writing in saying it's not an isolated case. That made people very irate, I've got to say. I think they were more likely to write into us just to prove that the case we covered before wasn't isolated. And they point out also that they had put the deadline back twice to give people some breathing room for this special concession. And they also say they have got extra staff working on this. It doesn't seem like they've got enough staff working on it, and maybe they're not the right staff because they aren't able to actually help people directly get it sorted out. All they can do is answer the phone and take a message in a lot of cases. I mean, they seem to be struggling, HMRC and the DWP, and because they're both working on it, HMRC takes the payments, but the DWP has to recalculate the state pension and the actual payments. You can see how a lot can go wrong as they pass cases between them.
Honestly, Tanya, every time you ever talk about things like this, I'll just shake my head and just think, oh, here we go again. Goodness me. And on the plus side, it keeps you busy, Tanya. You know, not that you're not busy enough anyway, but, you know, keeps you gainfully employed. So well done, DWP, for at least that. Lee, let's go on talk about something more positive. NS&I shot up the Best Buy savings table this week, or one of them, offering their highest ever rate of 6.2% for a 1-year fixed rate guaranteed growth bond. It also boosted its income bonds. Less famous than the premium bonds, Lee. Just tell us, what are guaranteed growth bonds and why is this such big news?
Yeah, NS&I does offer other products than premium bonds. Sometimes people forget that sometimes. I mean, it's synonymous with premium bonds. But the guaranteed growth bonds, essentially, it's just a 1-year fix. I think the guaranteed growth bond is just a fancy way of saying 1-year fix. And actually, to be honest, it's a bit of a funny name because it still doesn't beat inflation, which is 6.8%. But it's closing in. It's not too far away. So this 6.2% rate has just blown everything else out of the water because we've seen 1-year fixes actually start to get pulled in recent weeks. And I'll tell you why in a minute, why I think NS&I is doing this. So 6.2%. The one crucial difference between this and just a regular 1-year fix that's in our savings tables is that you can put up to £1 million into this account and it's treasury backed. Whereas with a savings account with banks and building societies, you have the £85,000 FSCS protection. But before you go and put £1 million into this account, it's not tax free. And again, I think a lot of people think NS&I and they think tax free because of premium bonds, but these are not tax free. So you will need to go and have a look if you're going to breach your personal savings allowance, which I won't go into massive detail here. But if you're a higher rate taxpayer, additional rate taxpayer, basic rate taxpayer, you need to go and check out what this means. So before you just go out and think you're going to get a certain rate of interest, you got to be careful. You've got £1,000 personal savings allowance if you're a basic rate taxpayer, £500 as a higher rate, and you don't have one as an additional rate. And that's
you mentioned this with the green bonds, didn't you, Lee? So
yeah, it's almost
a couple of weeks ago. Listen to podcast past.
Exactly, it's a tax trap you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
But 6.2%. Is a very good rate of interest compared to the rest of the market at the moment. And the income bonds pay 6.03%, again, which are our Best Buy rate. Very unusual for NS&I to be Best Buys. People do like monthly income because they every month pay out the interest as you go along. So very popular with pensioners, for example. Now, the reason why I say I was going to go into why I think NS&I have done this very, very briefly, there was a Bank of England money and credit report out this week, and there was 4 very interesting savings trends in this. And one of them is suggesting that NS&I are still struggling to actually attract more cash in than what's flowing out. So it had a £300 million pound deficit in the 2 months to July, suggesting more people bringing money out of NS&I than putting it in. And again, last week we were talking about the premium bonds dilemma. It just shows that people are having their head turned by better rates elsewhere. So from the 4 trends that I'm mentioning here, we've had a record start of the year for cash ISAs. Cash ISAs are back with a bang, Georgie. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
There's been a record year since 1999, since they launched in its current form. There's never been so much money going into cash ISAs, probably because of the personal savings allowance I was mentioning just now. Very tax efficient way to put your savings, £20,000 that you get each financial year. Amount of money going into fixed rates is absolutely incredible. 10.1 billion alone in July. There's now £244 billion tied up into fixed rates. That is huge. That's a massive figure. And I think that is why NS&I is attacking this market. 1 year fixes have been incredibly popular. And I think NS&I is thinking, how are we going to get more inflows if we don't? We've already done a lot to premium bonds. How much further can they go? Well, I'll tell you what, if we pump up the 1 year fix, that's clearly where a lot of cash is going. And that's what they've done. They've, as I say, blown all the others out of the water. The other trend from this, I said there's 4. So cash ISAs, NS&I not pulling in the money that it wants, and the fixed rates. There's still so much money just sloshing around earning no interest in current accounts. Is absolutely astronomical. Indication is that the average household has £8,267 to sit in a current account. You've got to remember that that's taken across everyone, so there'll be a lot of people that skew that figure with big balances in their current account. But that's quite incredible. £270 billion sitting in accounts gaining no interest. A couple of years ago, I can completely understand that. Today's environment, I don't get it at all. It makes no sense. On £8,267 with 4.9% interest, which is roughly where the Best Buy Easy Access is at the moment, you'd get £405 a year. I don't get it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. I know that people do like to have cash at their fingertips, and I know they like that feeling of a swelled current account, but they feel kind of safe in the knowledge that
And we've had a weird time, Lee. You know, it's been weird. Pandemics and all that jazz. It's weird.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that, again, the personal savings allowance is playing on people's minds.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I could go and do this, but am I going to breach my PSA? Am I going to have to do a self-assessment? All that kind of thing, I think, is kind of playing a little bit on people's minds. But it still feels like that money could be going into cash ISAs, for example, just doing anything other than sitting around in the current account, not doing much. But as I say, I understand a lot of people do just like that massive safety net of having a positive current account balance and having it all under one roof. But even if that is you, it's very likely that your bank will be offering some sort of interest that you can keep under one roof. It's not going to be market leading. It's not going to be Best Buy. We've had this conversation. We know that it's in the sights of, the government are not happy with how slow rate rises have been passed on by big banks, but they're still offering positive interest. Yes, it's nowhere near inflation, but it is better than just sitting around doing nothing.
Talking about inflation, thank you, Lee. As I mentioned, hitting every area of our lives, but it's not just our lives being affected. The cost of keeping our best friends in the comfort to which they're accustomed is soaring. I'm talking about our little furry friends, Helen. Dogflation. If This Is Money can add flation to any word, they will do it. Tell us more about dogflation. Anyone here have a dog? No? Dog? No. None of us have a dog, but that's fine. If we did, it would be expensive because dogflation is a thing. Helen.
Yeah, it is. I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about this because I am very much a cat person. But I assume
I'm sure catflation is that's next week's article.
Maybe that's a follow-up. So dogflation. Owning a dog now costs an extra £256 a year, bringing the figure for a year of looking after a dog to £2,500. Now that's analysis. I know, pricey. So that is figures that are Societal Money Mail has analysed from the Office of National Statistics and Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. So very official figures. That means that families can expect to pay as much as £27,800 over the average lifetime of a dog. So price rises over the past 12 months have added £2,867 to the overall cost of upkeep. That's a 12.8% increase. That's huge.
That is a lot. I can say I looked after a dog recently. I probably spent £2,000 in doggy poo bags because I have to kind of like hazmat myself up before I go in there. So I can see why I'm not probably a natural dog mum. I like how on the article though you've written ways to bite back, Helen. I like what you've done there.
Yeah, we're very clever, aren't we? So we have got some tips. You know, obviously with things like pets, people, you know, often the last thing someone is going to cut back on is treats and kind of looking after their dog or cat. But we have got a few ways that you can potentially cut the cost. So buy food in bulk, generally quite a good idea. Save quite a lot of money on that. Obviously quite heavy to carry around, but good thing to do. Shopping around for insurance, always a good idea. So yeah, obviously important to have insurance if the kind of worst happens to your cat or dog, but getting the right deal can save you potentially hundreds of pounds a year, so worth getting on the comparison sites and seeing what the best deal is. Check if your pet's eligible for subsidised care, so that's going to charities such as RSPCA, PDSA, Blue Cross. They might be able to help with your vet bills if you get certain benefits, if you live within their catchment area. And also, I didn't know you could do this, but buying medication for your pet online from websites such as petdrugsonline.co.uk, which are apparently for a fraction of the price you'd pay at the vet.
Right. Lee.
Yeah. I've got a big problem with this story in the fact that I've been singing Dogflation to the tune of Heaven 17 Temptation, which I hope doesn't get into his head. I've just been going around saying,
it's in my head now.
Take it or leave it, Dogflation.
Yeah.
So there's that element.
Okay.
But actually, on a serious note, it has become incredibly expensive to have a dog, and insurance costs have just been going through the roof. We've heard it from readers left, right, and centre, just how incredibly expensive and vet bills have just absolutely shot up. And actually, I'm not a dog person, I'm a cat person. I don't really feel the effects of catflation too much because my cat is quite small and literally just eats 2 pouches of food a day and a bit of dried and is absolutely fine and is happy with whatever you put down for it, which is all good. But up until recently, I kind of take the cat to the vet probably at least twice a year. I haven't this year because she hasn't really needed it. She has an underlying health condition which sometimes requires steroids and a steroid injection. The costs are just absolutely bonkers. I think to myself, I could never have insurance for her. We adopted her, actually. She was 3 years old. We adopted her. And we only found out about the underlying health condition after we adopted her, but couldn't get insurance because we'd taken her to the vet and then the vet told us what it was and then we couldn't get insurance. And it was like, here we go, this is going to be expensive. And it's incredible. And it makes you kind of realise, you know, just how expensive your own health bills could be if you didn't have a kind of standardised, prescription cost, for example, because things are just absolutely in the vet and pet industry out of control. One thing I would say is, unfortunately, I had 2 cats growing up. One of them passed away a few years ago, but one passed away in the last sort of 9 months or so. And she was over 20. So we'd had this cat for a very long time, my mum's cat, and we had to go and put her down. But my mum actually, not always, but fairly frequently used the PDSA. Because of various benefits that she's claiming. So it is worth a shot sometimes if you're not registered with PDSA or if you know someone that might be able to. It's worth looking up whether or not you qualify, depending on your life and what's going on. And it's definitely become a thing, hasn't it, in recent years? An absolute blow up of dog ownership. And I think that the pandemic, for example, there was a whole lot of stories about people adopting dogs and getting dogs and all that kind of stuff. And the cost of having that dog from 2020 to the cost of that dog this year, I mean, dogflation is real. I mean, really is. It must be adding quite a lot to bills. And it just shows you that every single area of our life has been affected by inflation.
It has, Lee. And the future as well. Lee, you're always supposed to end it on a bit of a high, but you've...
Oh, but aren't dogs and cats and they're lovely?
That's true. That's true. I'm not a big fan of cats.
They
No.
help brighten up our
Cats
lives.
don't love you. Dogs love you. Cats don't love you. They just.
My cat loves me, Georgie.
It doesn't. It just wants the 2 patches of food. That's all
Oh,
it's
don't
interested
say that.
in.
Oh, don't say
Yeah.
that. But no, they
Yeah.
bring us. Look, they bring us lots of joy. They bring us lots of happiness, and depending on what kind of animals you love. I know that's not everyone, and some people, But on the whole, I think most people just suck up that cost and go. But it cost me £2,900 a year to have my dog. But there's nothing else I could spend.
That's £2,000 of therapy.
But there's nothing you could. There's a lot of
Dog
people that argue there's
therapy.
nothing else that they could spend £2,900 on a year that would bring them as much joy and happiness as their beloved four-legged friend.
Lee. Right, that's it. You can keep up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. If you have any comments or questions of the team, anything you'd like them to look into, Lee?
Yeah, you can email us at editor@thisismoney.co.uk. You can X us at thisismoney, and you can also comment on the article where this podcast will live.
And if you like our podcast, why not rate us wherever you found us? It helps other people find us too.
Don't forget, you can stay on top of what's going on in the markets by tuning in to the Digest and Invest podcast by eToro. Go to your regular podcast platform and listen on the go. Digest and Invest by eToro, the podcast for those interested in trading and investing.